first of all, thank you for joining us. And what an important discussion. Something we all discuss among ourselves, and now bringing it on a platform like this, I think it will matter. A lot of people are tuned in. I hope we can take some questions at the end of it. So I want to start straight away with my very first question to Ms. Reddy. I want to start with you. So we are looking at how companies are ensuring employee well-being and fostering resilience. Tell me, in that direction, we have been into this crisis for almost close to 1.5 years now, close to it. How have you dealt with it so far? Have you mastered the art of bringing that resilience and that thought of well-being among employees by now?
Thank you so much for probably starting off with the panel. So I think your question is more around resilience and well-being, and it's been 1.5 years, and probably what are we doing, what are organizations doing. I think if you kind of go pre-pandemic, right, I think one of the trend in most corporate organizations has been that the shift had started, I'm talking about 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, where earlier benefits was about, okay, you claim a bill, right? You buy a medicine or you get hospitalized. I think the shift had started towards preventive sort of health, which was, stuff around, can we help you quit smoking, right? Or can we assist you during your 9 months of pregnancy? And I think from there, it kind of went on to even before the pre-pandemic, I'm talking about pre-pandemic, where mental health had probably become something that we were trying to break the taboo, right? Can we get organizations and employees to talk about? Then comes the pandemic, which has literally put all of this in the midst of everyone's lives. Now, whether you're at work or not at work, and now it's no longer a choice. And I think that is the biggest difference, right? Because earlier there was a choice, you could be proactive. And then if you cut forward to the post-pandemic, I mean, I don't know when, it's this year, next year, because we all don't know. I do think that's going to continue. There is going to be no choice, but for everyone to focus on this in whatever sense we can do. So think policies, right? I used to work for an organization even before the pre-pandemic, and this is pretty common in the digital ecosystem, where there was actually a well-being allowance with tons of flexibility. You could choose to do yoga, you could buy like running shoes, you could, go take a massage. So this concept of well-being, I think, will continue to stay as we, navigate this pandemic. I hope that answers your question, but if not, I'm
Right. Ms. Sachde, to you, tell me, how have you been ensuring employee well-being in this era of working remotely? In your case, of course, a lot of employees do come and used to interact with customers, and I think now it's gone back. Tell me, how did you deal with it? How did you ensure? What was your story?
For us, like you mentioned, the industry that we come from, unfortunately, work from home was not really an option. It was just about 10% of our associates or employees who could work from home. But when the first lockdown came in, we had to start getting creative because, unfortunately, we didn't need so many people who were there, and a lot of them were at home. And we had to engage because this is an industry that you have to be at work to be otherwise, being able to contribute. So what in the last 14 months as an industry, I think when I say I think I speak for my company, I speak for the industry also that I represent, is that, we had to start getting very creative with our teams. In terms of well-being, I think, like Ms. Reddy mentioned, that the concept had already started coming in. The wholesome you was already coming in, but I don't think it was catching up so much. But now we know for a fact that it is here. How did we engage our associates is we actually started utilizing these online platforms so well that we probably never thought as an industry we would actually do it. Because in the hotel, we have associate gyms available, we have all of this, but we've never really monitored how many associates were using it or how many associates were not using, or how many associates were into fitness or were into well-being and everything. Now, in fact, if you ask us, I think for all of us, we just know what our associates are into, because for the last 1 year, that's what we've spoken to them. We've encouraged this conversation to such a large extent that now we've encouraged them to come forward and talk about what things they want to do. this pandemic, I think the second wave specifically, when we talk to our teams, is a lot about getting our me time. A lot of associates did realize that we never got a chance to have our me time. And that's what now we're trying to move towards, even when they come back to work. Like we are 50% working, 50% of us are not working, but yet we have to go to work. So we're actually introducing things that we can do right within our premises, encourage a small little walk after they've had their lunch, or probably in the evening. Like for us, we have bio bubbles right now from a safety security point of view. So associates or employees are in the hotel. They don't go out because we have to continue catering and we have to maintain the whole pandemic guidelines as well. So we all actually encourage them in the evening at around 6 o'clock when we know it's a little bit of a lull, dinner services are not starting. We encourage them to take a walk within the hotel, saying, let's go. We bring in our teams online along at that time, saying whoever is sitting at home logs into our Microsoft Teams app, which is available for us to use. We actually get them online and we say, okay, let's all of us take a walk together. We catch up at that time. So it's basically getting very, very creative in terms of how to use the online portals, but more so for hotel industry, it was about creating this awareness that it is important for us to right now focus on our health, get our immunity back. Because whilst we were not considered frontliners, we were still frontliners because our hotels were being converted into hospitals. We were taking care of a lot of the entire repatriation crowds that were coming. So that's how we basically in the last 14 months have managed to bring a lot of awareness and get creative with our well-being concept.
Right. Ms. Burman, if we look at the concept of well-being and employees, I think it's not that this pandemic has suddenly brought it to existence. It was there always, but maybe sidelined a bit. There were gyms in the swanky gyms and offices. Maybe employees never got a chance to look at it. I think when it opens up, people are going to take it more seriously. Tell me, the overall well-being, how has it now adjusted? How has the definition changed for companies? Because we always thought about it earlier, but now how has it become different in your view?
All right, so and I'll talk to you about experiences for the past 14 months. I think the first shift that has happened is I think all of us have become far more responsible. I think the level of awareness amongst people to be able to say, what is it that I need to be responsible for? And how do I necessarily translate that responsibility in a wider community, which is how does it affect my team members? How does it affect my family, right? That awareness and sense of responsibility has gone up. And I think what organizations are doing, which is what we are doing, is to say, how do you supplement that, right? Because how people take information and practice information is very different. So how do you cater to those different segments of population? How do you necessarily assimilate that and make it a practice is where the investment of energy really is right now. Right. The other thing that we are observing very clearly is an absolute synergy of physical well-being, emotional and mental well-being, and financial well-being, right? Because when you're really realizing, I think a sense of, and I go back to the point that I mentioned, the sense of responsibility to say, how can my action create a positive impact somewhere else in the wider community is far more center stage. Right. And as a result, that is the biggest shift I think the pandemic has actually brought. While the concepts were all there, I think how do you necessarily make it a habit? How do you make it more attuned to yourself and your wider community is where the change really is.
Right. Ms. Puri, the stories are similar, of course, but how have you, your company, Sapphire Foods, dealt with the concept in the last 14 months, ensuring that every employee feels cared for, gets that personalized attention which was there in the physical space, doesn't feel left out? What all steps have you taken as a brand to ensure that?
Well, it has been a very difficult journey for us all this while. We run about 350 plus stores of Pizza Hut and KFC in the country. And our stores opened by around first week of April last year. We've been running stores. That's when the government made our sector as essential services. And we've been running our stores across the country in very, very difficult situations. And therefore, first and foremost was, I think, that resilient factor that had to be plugged into the team. We had to really talk about it. We had to repurpose our people. Safety of self and consumer, just sheer amount of talking was something that we went whole hog. We've got people from various socioeconomic backgrounds, and therefore the concept of hygiene, the concept of, while we maintain very high standards of hygiene at stores, we had to really focus their health and hygiene at home. Therefore, involving their families was one big element that we got into. So talking about health and hygiene, then getting them out of that whole fear that will I contract and what will happen if I contract the disease, and talking to them, telling them that, look, we are in it, giving them that, staying connected, giving them that constant support that we are there with you, actually going all the way out. If you have a person staying at home who's or the family who's got the disease, go out and help them full-fledged, and they see that the organization is willing to put in. By the time we were able to establish that confidence in the team, we started all our mental and physical, emotional and mental well-being programs. Having yoga sessions, meditation sessions earlier was something that field teams are not interested in. Someone who's an operator hardcore will say, I'm not interested. But suddenly we had over 100 people, attending one yoga session, meditation sessions, and we had to actually make it almost a weekly affair initially, and then we tapered it down. When we realized that people are getting that emotional and mental strength, we tapered it down. Now we have it every 15 days. And let me tell you that, the whole participation has not gone down. People have been enthused. They're now morphing into a very different set of people. One, they've got a purpose of keeping themselves safe. They've got a purpose of keeping teams safe. And more so, they've got the purpose of giving that joy to the consumer while we're delivering at home. So I think we worked across the spectrum, from the fear of getting them out of their houses to get them to come to our stores, and now going all the way out without any fear, yet fully prepared, full hygiene into place, social distancing into place, and serving customers. I think that whole purpose has driven our teams really strongly, and that has been a journey for us. While we were doing a lot of stuff before, the traction that it has found today has been very, very, very different, Ruhail, for us. It's been one of the most successful initiatives in the pandemic that we've been able to, engage people meaningfully with a different, renewed purpose, and with that responsibility that I need to step in when the nation needs me. So that whole feeling of being there, ready to be essential services and serve the consumers, keeping our own safety in mind, has been a step change that we've been able to get at the grassroots levels in our stores.
Right. Totally agree. I think, all of us have taken different approaches. I want to come to Ms. Raghuvanshi here. Your perspective is slightly different. You have been more of an observer of this trend as well. Tell me, when you compare this pandemic era that we are in to what was before it, and look at the HR policies and overall, approach to employee well-being, how is it panning out in your view?
Thank you, Ruhail, and it was great listening to all the people over here. Just a quick thing from my perspective, of course, the way we look at things from our end, it's also been like how mental well-being has kind of come at the center stage, right? Everybody was talking about how important employee health and well-being has become in this time. So I think what we've seen is that taking a center stage, not just for the employees of the organization, but even the extended recommended people who work for the organization. I think this was something which had never happened in the past. Even for us, if you ask, given the kind of work and the industry that we are in, I think listening to everyone else here, when we went into the lockdown last year, it was a lot about the mantra of safety, engagement, and productivity, right? And what we realized over a period of time, that it's a lot about rediscovering and reimagining all throughout, because not a second has the pandemic given us to kind of sit on our laurels or be able to relax and say that, okay, now it's done or over. I think it's been a journey where all of us have been kind of exploring ways to keep our people engaged. I think what has come at the center stage is peace of mind, because what we've realized is in time like this, where everybody is kind of holed up into their houses, and with many people, many employees and their families falling sick, I think organizations, if you look at even the way industry kind of came together, it was all around giving that peace of mind to their employees. And you will see so many initiatives being taken, from vaccination to oxygen concentrators. Like for us in Randstad, we actually went ahead and tried tapping in our global community to get oxygen concentrators to for our employees, because we realized that in the interim, when you don't get hospitalization and you are struggling to get bed, oxygen concentrator kind of comes for a big help. Financial aid, because we all know, and Economic Times kind of shared this as well, that 40% of the insurance money that people are spending is not being covered by the insurance, right? So giving that financial aid to people, because they were struggling for cash, they were cash strapped. So I think these have kind of come on top of every employer's mind, and these are the initiatives. Apart from giving them that me time, I think that me time is also becoming important, because many people came back saying that they don't have time to even take care of their families, given the juggles and the pressures at work, right? Because at the end of the day, the organization has to run the profit. We are all for-profit organizations, so those have to happen. So I think giving that me time so that they are able to juggle and figure out what are their priorities and come back and work with the organization is another trend which is kind of emerging as well, around mindfulness, around relieving people of stress. So I think these are 4 or 5 things that we see at a high level, and I think there is not a single organization which is not working towards it. I think the intent is pretty clear across the HR industry as well as overall in the business as well.
Right. I think it's never easy to pivot to a new direction. Of course, well-being was there, but to ensure that it becomes a culture, part of a culture, part of a routine, of course, is not said and done. I mean, it takes time. So I want to understand that little story from you, Ms. Reddy, that while it was there, well, it is planned and done, and now it's part of the culture. But was there a challenge initially? How did you bring everybody on board? Kind of cooperate and make it a daily part of a work culture. What was the story like?
Yeah, I think Ruhail, it depends on the type of the role that you have, right? Because if you're a field employee versus if you're doing a software role versus being a person in the manufacturing plant, the demands of the role are very different, right? As a result of which I feel like even the well-being sort of requirements are very different. I think just like Anjali said, I think at Philips, we look at it from we call it the triple duty of care, right? So you are keeping employee health and safety right at the center, but you are looking at business continuity, you are looking at sort of customers. But I think going back to the point on culture, I think this is where the leadership, right, plays an active role. Like, how are they role modeling it? Because many a times it's not okay to delegate everything to managers down in the organization to say, hey, manage your teams or do this. I think these are times where people have learned by observing. So, for instance, if there was a certain group that had never worked from home, and we know there are tons and tons of such examples, I think it comes down to trust, right? The trust and the relationship between the manager and the employee. So I think for those managers and employees to get better, we had lots of leaders out there, I think learning, and I'm using the word learning because I think there were people who probably didn't know themselves despite being leaders. So the journey has been, I would say, from discovery to say, can we do it? Can we, maintain this rhythm? Versus, I think now when you see productivity metrics where a lot of companies, and Philips is no different, where we actually feel like productivity wise, we're in the late 90s. This comes with challenges, I think, you talk to employees, you talk to leaders, people feel like they're working much more than what they used to work earlier. So the concept of well-being is no longer, I would say, just physical and mental. There is an element of how are you integrating your home with your work? And I think that's where the policy bit around how you're giving flexibility. Do you have flexibility in work hours? Do you have flexibility in meeting times? Do you have flexibility in terms of, like earlier, your childcare policies? Today, you don't have childcare policies. So I think there's a lot to do with flexibility as well, which ultimately drives well-being to the employee because they feel like they're being taken care of.
Right. I think the role of HR, the theories and all that we read, I think this pandemic has put everything into practice now. And that the interesting part is that the HR has become the centerpiece of all conversation. It's become the engine now. To you, Ms. Sachde, what was it like, initially when you were trying to stitch things together, join the dots, and bring in this new routine? How was it like? Was it easy? Was it easy for you in the beginning?
No, it definitely wasn't easy. I mean, see, like we've spoken, a lot of the pandemic is something that none of us had ever experienced it. We didn't know how was it to be dealing with things like this. And then talk about hotel industry, where the only expectation that we always had was that you had to be physically there to be able to do your job, or to be able to be productive is what we thought. However, the pandemic brought a mindset change. We did realize that yes, while we needed associates or employees to be in the hotel to do this work, we started looking at ways and means of things that associates, when they were sitting at home, they could actually contribute. Like, for example, our company runs a program, like we spoke about at the beginning, of Wholesome You, which is called as Take Care. Now, Take Care is something that we look at as an initiative which takes care of everything for the associate when he or she is at work, or she is at home, or the community that the employee is a part of, right? So we realized that if we can utilize the energies that our associates have at work, we could actually channel it to the other side. So we encouraged associates as part of this initiative who couldn't come to the hotel and physically work to become part of communities that they are in. So contribute towards the communities, contribute towards their fellow colleagues who were kind of, stranded in the pandemic, couldn't go home, couldn't come to work. So that is how we started kind of building something which was more, complex, rather than just saying that, okay, come to the hotel and that's when you'd get productive. We looked at this pandemic as a way of redoing the entire businesses that we had. A lot of times hotels open up, we're doing things and we're constantly doing things as per the policies that are laid out, but we've not really had a chance to do a refresher. We actually used the entire 14 months time to relook at every single process in the hotel. We asked associates to go through policies, recommend changes. Then we thought of the things that we could do. Basically, our leadership team started engaging with them in smaller groups in order to ensure that their ideas are still coming up. Then came the time when, again, in all of this pandemic, there was a lot of fear that was prevailing. And at that time, like we discussed with Sapphire Foods as well, we had to ask everybody to come back to the hotel, because we were now looking at catering to people traveling from different countries and coming back, right? That, I think, was a toughest transition that we had, because as an organization, as a company, as Marriott, as a company, we were standing by our associates and saying, come to the hotel, take care of, guests who could be positive, who could be negative, we don't know. But give them the confidence that as an organization, we are with them. So I think just when we use the lockdown period to kind of relook at our policies and everything and tell them to take care of themselves, get more evolved as a take care champions that we would like to call them, then we had to saying give them all the kind of assistance that we had to get them to come back to work, settle their fears. I think that was the biggest challenge that we had. And I think that was the most difficult task that as human resources we have to do, because at the end of the day we didn't know what was going to happen when we were going to contract this disease, but we still convinced our teams to come back. And that's where our responsibilities increased even further, because they came back. It was important for us to take care of them like they were our families. So when anyone in our hotel contracted the disease, I've gone through it. A lot of my team members have gone through it. Associates across the country went through it. As an organization, we took care of everything. That is where build the confidence. That was the different complete aspect, because otherwise hotels were so busy. Sometimes when associates would call in sick, we would just make a call. The leaders would just make a call, you're unwell. But this time around, the 17 days of quarantine, we would make sure that the meals were sent from the hotel. We would make sure that the doctors of the hotel were available for them. So that has been our interesting journey, which is what has continued the.
Right. Coming to you, Ms. Burman, the story of challenge in this entire piece of bringing employee well-being in the center stage. What was it for you?
Yeah, for us, we continue to actually have 10 to 12% of our employees who are mission critical and client critical working throughout the pandemic situation in the office, right? Now, that's one element of it, and I'll cover that. But I think the larger part that we have to think about is not so much people physically being in office, but if you have employees who are working from home, but if you have a family member who is sick, right, that actually impacts the productivity and how engaged you are at work. So as a result, I think the definition of workspace itself, and I think Vishpala was talking about it, I think it's more about an integration of what you define as a workspace, right? And where do you always draw a line? So as a result, when you think about well-being from a work standpoint, I think our focus has been how do you necessarily take care of these exigencies which people are not prepared for, right? For example, our homes in India, in most situations where people come from or our homes are not designed to work from home, are not designed to be able to give space to people in a work area. Now, how does that really impact your well-being? How does it impact your productivity, right? So I'll give you very simple examples. When there are client escalations, in a normal environment, you would be possibly sitting in office and working through so many issues and escalations where your family members may not be exposed to some of those conversations. Right now, they are. So how do you necessarily handle some of those elements and bring in sensitization while focusing on customer predictability, as well as making sure that your productivity matrix from a delivery excellence standpoint, employee centricity standpoint is not compromised on, is where the integration of well-being is actually happening. So as far as people working from office, the mission critical and the client critical, I think making sure that the transportation is taken care of, making sure that they are safe. And I think we also Julie spoke about it, like, should there be a situation, and all of us have faced through and we are going through it, if somebody is infected, what care do you really give, right? And I'll tell you one more thing, because what's also happening is people at this point in time are concerned about what impacts my leave. What is the social stigma that I will go through as a result of this, correct? How will my team members treat me when I actually go back, right? How do you handle and talk about some of these things so that it doesn't necessarily come more as a stigma or a taboo is another part of integration of what we're going through. And most importantly in this journey, it's really about the managers and leaders. And that's what we're focusing on, because people observe, right? What language you use, how you integrate, and people emulate those behaviors. And we're spending a lot of time to be able to really educate and sensitize the managers to become role models in some of those behaviors. And it's not easy for them, right? To even ask somebody, and the other part is also, it's not that people are based in Bangalore or the major cities. People are spread across all over India, but you have to focus on predictability. You have some members who are coming to office, others somebody sitting in maybe a very small part in Rameshwaram, right? Because that's where they're working from. How do you drive that integration of workspace is the biggest thing that we are actually working through in a pandemic situation.
Right. Brilliant points. I think these are the bigger challenges, and dealing with them has been, the biggest success. Ms. Puri and then Ms. Raghuvanshi, your thoughts on, how did it happen? Yes.
I think...
Ms. Puri, you can start it.
Yes. So, the journey has been very similar to what other panelists have shared, being able to communicate with people and tell them that we are there, being able to communicate to people that it's only if there is business continuity is the continuity that will also sustain us, right? If the business comes to a standstill, it is very difficult for a prolonged period for us to be able to take care of employees. And therefore, a symbiotic relationship that had to be evolved actually came to life. That was one. In terms of being able to, and this was, I think, one of the most difficult part, because there were no work and personal life boundaries, for us to tell people that we need to give space to employees. And that's where working with managers extensively, HR team had one-on-one calls with all the managers across, telling them to give people space and time, bringing out policies like no meetings after 6, no Zoom calls early in the morning, lunch times to be free, and allowing. So I myself, when I used to be on call, I would make, because we didn't have support at home, I would be in the kitchen cooking. I would be, and you could in the background hear the pressure cooker go, and the kids shouting. So having to tell the managers that it's okay, because these are the times and we need to be ready for it. And I think sensitizing the teams that it's all right. We're there and nothing will go wrong much more than which has already gone wrong. And I think that confidence really pulled the teams together. Beautiful thing that happened is because we were so sensitized to needs of people all across, and this time there was no difference between men being able to take care of the family or women being, because everyone was home, everyone was taking care of families and their extended families. So giving them that space and time, and then being able to sensitize the managers to give people space and time, and all this while keeping the business agenda live and rolling. I think the leadership team used to have almost fortnightly calls with all their teams. HR used to have, initial days, used to have monthly calls with all the managers. That means I am personally having at least 50 calls over the, a week, to be able to have small groups and telling them that it's fine and these are the ground rules that we work with. To being able to generate that confidence in the store teams. Finally, our stores are where our livelihoods are, right? So being able to generate that confidence in the store teams that we are all there supporting, standing right, strong and tall, really helped us transform. The amount of collaboration that happened. If anyone felt sick, there were 5 people pitching in cross-functionally. So this is the time when collaboration in true sense came to life at our organization. Not once did we have a showstopper because someone was out on some exigency. There was someone or the other team that was willing to pitch in, and that's where, the whole beauty of having a resilient individual versus having a resilient team really played up the part. I think that's the journey we've been able to create and morph into a very different animal, ferocious one at that.
Right. I think initially, we're all coming to terms with, I remember people walking in the frame, and now we have mastered this art, and cook a vessel and the kids around. I think we've all been through it, and also it has brought out the human side of our daily existence, and we have to accept it happens. You're dealing at a place where the boundary between professional and personal is merged. Also, I think trust has become the biggest, we have now, everything works on trust, we know. I think HRs are not really concerned to check every minute what the employees are doing. I think that's the beauty of this entire piece. Coming to you, Ms. Raghuvanshi, your story at Randstad, how did you put in that, stitch those stories together and bring that culture? And overall, industry-wise, what are you observing on that front? Have all the sectors been able to master this, or is there a lot left to be done?
Thank you, Ruhail. I think just to put Randstad's story around, as I was listening to everyone, I think our story started with being connected, being engaged, and having fun. I think this is what 2020 was all looking like, because one was we are not an organization which was like 100% work from home was the way of working as such. So first thing was like, how do we keep ourselves connected? How do we know what's exactly going on in each other's life, in their work life? Then came, how do we keep them engaged, because they're so far from managers were not used to seeing their people not on a daily basis. So engagement was the second thing. And then came, like, everybody was getting bored because it was a 2 months lockdown, everybody was in their house, and what can organization do to ensure there is a bit of fun and laughter in the teams, within the groups, etc. From there on, it kind of moved into like empathy and compassion, as others were also speaking about, where we had to do a lot of work for our managers to build that empathy and compassion. And as we all rightly said, it's a common problem. This is not a challenge. Globally, everybody was struggling. So understanding was easier. But again, the whole tussle between target versus how do we show empathy and how do we bring empathy into action through compassion was the challenge all our managers were working around. So I think the end of the year was a lot around that. And then came the second wave, right, where the whole focus moved into peace of mind, space for the employee, their health and well-being being on the critical thing. And as everybody spoke about the business continuity part, right, how do we manage that while so many of our employees are falling sick, being in touch with them, giving them a call every day to check how are they feeling, and not just them but their family, because it's not just when you yourself fall sick, but when your kids or your parents, your in-laws are sick, you are kind of gone, right? Your bandwidth is not there. So doing all of that, I think that's a cycle I'm sure most of the organizations have gone through, and so have we kind of gone through the very same cycle. Right now at this point in time, it's again, I think July is when it tapers off, so the focus is still continuing to be how do we give that space and time to our people, but at the same time kind of helping them how do they juggle between good to haves and must haves, right? Continuity is all about ensuring the must haves run, and it's not about doing the good to haves. So how do you do that expectation setting along with the managers and the people? And all of this can only be done when all of your leaders truly believe in what you are saying. As an HR community or fraternity, we can say a lot of things, but your leaders have to buy in and they have to feel the pain equally as you do. So I think that communication and converting it into a business language that where business is understanding it as much as you, because I think this is the year where connection between employee versus outcome has been the most very well seen by everybody. Now people do believe that if your employees are not there and they are not well, things won't happen. So I think that's how HR has also got that voice and space, and that space at the table or center stage, as you were putting in, Ruhail, as well. I think that's one thing from an industry perspective, because we do work with a lot of clients. I think my viewpoint has been that, like, as you can see, it's a variety that's present here in the panel as well. I think everybody is focused on the very same goal. I think employee well-being, mental well-being is kind of has become the common theme across organizations. There is no one industry who can say that, hey, you know what, I am kind of immune to this. So I think that thing is very common. And I think what I really like about the industry is that how they're actually extending these facilities and benefits, not just to their own core employees, but even to contractual employees who probably are working on someone else's payroll, but are in their premises. And we've noticed that because we are, of course, one of the largest staffing organization, and we see that happening across the clients, including financial aid. So there have been clients who have come forward and said that we would like to take care of their family, the ones who lost their lives doing that. So I think clearly compassion and empathy has come out in the industry. That's the observation that I have made in whatever has come to us.
Right. I think what stays with us post this pandemic, when I think the ban on wearing masks, not the ban, the protocol of wearing masks is lifted. I think a lot of takeaways would be there, when we resume offices, and I don't know what kind of work culture would it be. Maybe it's hybrid, it's both, work from home. And I think HRs won't get very, panicky about that employees are at home now they understand it. But tell me, if you talk to people, the stress always comes from the work side, the portion. That's what people say. A lot of 80% of the stress is work related. Will this pandemic lead us to an era where, we can redesign existing jobs and roles at workspace in a way that are where employees can thrive and not be stressed. Do you think, are we headed towards that? I want to start with you, Ms. Reddy. Do you think that, which was always in theory, becoming a practice once this pandemic is over?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Ruhail, I'm very optimistic, right? I think if the pandemic hasn't changed us, what will? So I feel like this whole concept of the future of work, right, is a reality. And I don't think future of work is equal to what we did in the past. So for instance, if you again, I'm going back to the same point, it comes down to two things. It is linked to the nature of the role, because there are already roles out there in the field and they'll continue to be in the field, right? Things, sales, service, etc. Nothing's going to change in the future, at least from your job standpoint. However, there are several roles where in the past they couldn't have been probably done from their homes. And I think it's a known concept across the globe. Many sort of organizations have already announced this to say that you can continue to work from home for a portion of your time. So for instance, even in Philips, in a commercial organization, we had, even during the pandemic, had told people that even in the future, you need to come to work to do collaborative work. So we're not really encouraging people to come to work to clear emails, to kind of clear expense statements, but you come to work to solve a problem. You come to work to innovate. You come to work to meet your colleagues and friends. So I think this is cultural, but this is also, I think, a little bit policy driven. I think the third bit that you were talking about is in terms of types of roles, right? Like today, if you look around and we have people from Randstad, but we have this concept of fixed and contingent, and all this is going to increase, right, in the future. So this concept of project-based, gig-based, where people can choose to say, okay, I want to work X number of hours in a week. Basis that, here are probably the types of roles that are available, which I don't think today they exist in the totality in a country like India. They exist in many other organizations. I mean, many other countries, I would say, right? Like pure part-time sort of work, right? Or this concept of, I know we have few companies where you can job share, right? So you have two people doing the same job. So I do think we're unearthing that. And I think the last bit, which most companies are dabbling in today, is virtual. Today, if you look at developed economies like the US, etc., you would have almost like 5% to 10% of their workforce or 100% virtual. And today, I think we're getting there. So the simple answer is yes, things will change, have to change. Have we figured it all out? I don't think so. But there's lots of promise, lots of ideas, and I think it's a good world that we're going to move into in the future.
Ms. Sachde, earlier when you were sharing your story, would it remain the same? Would the employees have the same approach? Or we wish, the way HR is right now, it stays the way. Where are we headed?
Well, the story will change. If you look at it at this stage, I think talk about all of us as well. We want to stop talking about the pandemic as it's going to be forever. It is going to remain, but we will need to start moving away from that conversation, everything related to pandemic, and start normalizing things. Like the biggest, like we were just talking about, the biggest concept that we are looking at, thinking as a company that we think is, the last 14 months have put so much of added pressure in multi-skilling. You have to keep multi-skilling. You have to keep doing multiple things at the same time. Probably the concept of skilling is what we may have to look for some time, because when everybody is going to come back, when things are going to reopen, when states are definitely going to reopen in all the places, the task force or the teams that are going to come back are going to be changed. They have gone through a lot of losses. They must have seen either in their families or in their surroundings, and the resilience that they will have. They've already been building up their resilience so much that when they come back to work, emotionally, they will still want to feel connected to the same organization that they had joined a couple of years ago, right? So that is where we have to just start moving towards. That is where the understanding of leaders will come into play. The 14 months that we've prepared them, like how each one of us spoke, preparing your leaders. Now will be the time to probably not only look at just a productivity point of view, but look at the emotional quotient that a person is coming in. The millennial generation, pre-pandemic, it was all about millennials and what their expectations were. All of a sudden, I think these millennials will be required to grow up, because we are seeing it in our organization. Losses are personal and losses are tremendous. So probably that sensitivity will need to be brought in, yet staying away and moving away from pandemic as a permanent reality, and probably something called as till we get to where we want to, the mono-skilling concept. Let's not burden them with so much of additional tasks or everything. We're looking at giving them slow and steady, so that we build it up. We build that resilience that they have got from their emotional learnings to build into a high-performing team. Bring that resilience there and then utilize their energies accordingly. I think that is what we will move towards. That's how the world is going to look like. More emotional sensitivity towards everything that we're trying to achieve as part of an organizational goal.
Perfect. Sounds great. I hope it stays that way. And of course, I think we are headed to it. There's no doubt about it. Ms. Burman, your thoughts on making workplace, a place where you thrive, you don't get stressed, you connect with it easily. You're not bothered about, that you will be held up for the smallest of mistakes. That trust, I think, do we see, in your view, are you in your organization kind of expecting this kind of a turn totally in the industry overall? Are you expecting this turn in the industry?
I would say yes, because I will say yes because there's no other way, right? And all it determines is how can you make it successful and sustainable, right? Mm-hmm. And finally, it just focuses on what will you use, what resources will you use to make it successful and sustainable, right? And as a result, if you look at use of technology, use of integration of what your data or your systems are telling you to human intelligence or the emotional intelligence, which I think we spoke about, is an important integrator, right? And I think the other important part is, like you said, now the concept of work from anywhere is a reality, right? So what can become a differentiator or an area of compromise is which organization do you want to belong to, right? And what really defines you in terms of your association with the organization. That is actually becoming far more widespread definition because each one will have their view of what they want to associate with. When you talk about trust and how do you actually bring that synergy together, being able to find a common route, finding a common way to stay invested in that as a community within the organization is going to be an important driving factor, right? And when you talk about change in roles, I don't think the functional aspects of the role is going to change as much, rather than what do we value and how do you value it? And based on when you determine that as your outcome, how do you necessarily deliver value and contribute towards that at each level of the workforce will become an important responsibility. And how do you drive your policies? How do you communicate your values is going to be an important driver from an organization workspace standpoint.
Right.
It's going to be about, and I think we spoke about it, the integration of the different kinds of workforce is going to become far more synergistic. And I think the definition of, okay, this work can be done only by a certain category of employment grouping, I think that distinction is going to come down substantially.
Perfect. Ms. Puri, how do you see the post-pandemic workplace? What changes, what shifts are you kind of expecting that will be there? And what will be the learnings from the pandemic that would stay in an era which is new, which is post this COVID, hopefully?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So one of the biggest shifts that will come because of the pandemic is the sheer concept of flexibility, understanding, and compassion. I think these three drivers are going to be in the driving seat all the time. There are many organizations who were earlier flexible in their timings. I think the flexibility that I am talking of is the flexibility of approach to work, flexibility of approach towards objectives and targets. I think now we've realized, and trust is probably one of the binary factors here, where we know that if the objectives are known to people, they're clear to people, They need to be given that flexibility, space and time to be able to deliver it. And not one person that exists in the organization is unwilling to achieve those targets. I think that has been the biggest win of this entire pandemic, where trust has become the fulcrum and people are willing to trust you almost with their lives, right? When my employees come to stores, they're willing to trust their lives with us, and therefore we reciprocate that with giving them all the support that is needed. So I think that's one of the biggest wins that is going to be sustainable and consistent for a very, very long time. I don't think it's going to be a stress-free environment. It never will be. When you have organizations, when you have people who are working towards goals, I don't think those situations are going to be stress-free. But yes, will they be understanding and more compassionate and more collaborative? By all means, they will be. So from structural perspective, physical perspective, there will be a lot of flexibility available. From delivery perspective, there will be flexibility available, but the end goals people will resonate with. There will be a lot of communication that will be established throughout the system, throughout the entire organization, the absence of which can be catastrophic for organizations, right? And what will happen is that because industries and organizations are going to create those kind of environments, any organization who's not willing to transform will have a challenge. I think it's going to be almost like an induction effect where we'll see best in class operate and we'll be inspired by them to become flexible. Will we be stress free? No, we will not be. Will there be less stress? Probably not. But will there be an understanding? Will there be space? Will there be collaboration, compassion, and focus on well-being, both emotional, physical, and mental? Yes, by all means, I think those are here to stay. I think next decade, probably next century is for that. And yes, I think digitization is going to be the key word also. I mean, I've seen us transform. Even the brick and mortar business like ours has really fostered on digitization, whether it is our cost system, whether it is our the delivery apps that we're using. That has been the primary bedrock for us. That will continue to be, and therefore investment in those spaces from just the skill perspective, I think is going to be phenomenal for us and across the industry. But yeah, I think those things will stay.
Right. Mr. Raghuvanshi, your thoughts? I want to ask one last question. After that, we have around 5 minutes. So yes, please. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think I'll just talk about one thing. Like we have learned about forming, norming, and storming. I think in this cycle, it literally went the other way around. It was storming, and then we are forming and kind of norming. So I think keeping that in mind, I think two aspects which I will like to focus on is one is the way the workspace is evolving, and the other thing is in terms of the way the jobs are evolving. So everybody took a dig on in terms of how things are shaping up. Just to kind of quickly speak about workplaces, I think everybody spoke about mental well-being, and I think that to me is something that is going to be a big thing happening across workplaces as we move in. And there is no question about whether it is going to kind of end with the pandemic out of our lives, but I think these are some things which will continue to exist in the workplaces around mental and physical well-being of employees being the key. On the job front, I think it's going to be a very different kind of workforce out there. Look at it like this: with digitization coming in and automation literally creeping into every job, everyone is kind of moving into a specialist and advisor sort of a role, especially the frontline people. Now, what you will need really in these people is passion and engagement, because a passionate and an engaged employee is the one who will really deliver quality to the customer and in result bring a result for you, right? So how do you define, how do you do the expectation setting for a workforce like that? How do you hire a workforce like that? And then the question is challenges also in terms of how can you build or develop a workforce like that. So I think advisors are the specialists are the way to go forward. Simple thing is we all have websites, we all have our products being offered on the website, but nowadays in the pandemic we get call from people to say, hey, I'll help you in terms of being your fashion advisor, you go and then place your order online. So that's the way we are seeing the world changing. So I think yes, jobs per se, there is going to be a lot of change, but workplace I think have learned their lessons, and we see only great things coming in from a workplace perspective. Back to you, Ruhail.
Right. My final question, we have 5 minutes. I will to everyone. I want everyone to respond to it like 1 minute answers. HR has also become a space now where it's buzzing with activities. It has become the interface of the good news and the bad news. So while we are talking about employee well-being and resilience, tell me, how are the HR leaders themselves coping with this? How have you maintained that, that you have built that toughness to break and deal with all kinds of issues? They first come to you now. Starting with you, Ms. Reddy, quick 1 minute answer. How are you staying resilient yourself in this situation?
I think you're absolutely right. We're human as well, right? So I think you need to remember that. And I think I say that to the entire HR team. To look after others, you have to look after yourself. So I think for me, it's investing in my own sort of mental balance. I mean, I was COVID infected a month ago. So I think just experiencing that for my family and practicing what works. So I don't get into the details whether it's exercise, but for me, meditation really works. So I think, and kind of, I think the last bit for me, Ruhail, is that to carve out time, right? So it'll never stop, but how do you carve out a time in a space where it's indeed your space? So yeah, start by looking after yourself.
Ms. Sachde.
I think for me, the way it has worked out is just try and get some disconnected hours, like just whatever works out, probably make a cutoff for yourself, just disconnect, whether it's after 8 o'clock, whether it's after 10 o'clock, but keep your phone aside. And then that's it. Do not look at it till morning unless, of course, there
wow.
loans for emergencies. But yeah, a little bit of disconnection is definitely something that has worked for me. Rest, like we mentioned, exercises, mental health, being, everything is there. But more than that, I think it's just that little bit of staying away and just focusing on family. And I think my dogs, they've been very, very kind during the last 14 months. I have 3 of them, so they've really been very, very supportive. So I guess that's what has worked for me.
I think we all need that digital detox, absolutely. Ms. Burman, what's your story?
I think what has worked for me is to really be authentic and being vulnerable, because I think that actually helps you to be able to lay off certain expectations that people might have of you all the time. And you allow yourself that permission and that space to say, just let me be, and then I'll come back to you. So I think being authentic and being able to have some of those conversations and very clearly saying that vulnerability is with everybody, it just builds a lot more compassion. That works for me.
Right. Ms. Puri and Ms. Raghuvanshi.
I think for me, primarily it has been giving a lot of space to my team. So like I mentioned earlier, the objectives are there, go do it at your own pace, at your own time. The timelines are there for people to meet, and beyond that, I don't get into their way. So personally for myself right now, I think the adrenaline rush is still on. I have not felt the need for a break. Even when I've been out, I have been into thick of things. So for me, it has been right now work nonstop. And not that I'm propagating it. I think to each his own, everyone should find their ways of finding that peace. To me right now, the peace is work. So that's where I have. But for the teams, absolutely their pace, their time, their goals.
Right.
I don't interfere.
Final words, Ms. Raghuvanshi.
Thank you. So I think for me, I would say that burning out or being burnt out is something unavoidable at this point in time. Being conscious is something I will definitely suggest, that be conscious of that. And what works is creating a bubble of love. And when I say bubble of love, it's your loved ones, your family, your friends. Talking to them gives you joy. So whenever you have that thing, when you're like done and you know that you consciously burnt out, just go to your bubble of love. And that's the best way of kind of getting over everything and then back to the rut, as I would say.
Right. Thank you, all of my esteemed panelists, for joining us and sharing your individual stories of how you have dealt with, built that culture, and also sharing your insights about how the future of workplace and well-being would look like. And kudos to all of you for doing that, and I think HRs are ones that I earlier said are driving right now the entire piece of organizational strength. Thank you once again